The sun hadn't fully risen when Sarah Chen stepped out of the faded blue sedan that had seen better years. The vehicle coughed and sputtered before finally falling silent in the parking lot of Fort Sterling Military Training Facility. Everything about her arrival seemed wrong for this place. Her sneakers were worn at the edges, her jeans had patches on the knees, and her jacket looked like something pulled from a donation bin at a thrift store. She stood there for a moment, taking in the imposing gates and the perfectly maintained grounds beyond them. Other recruits were arriving in newer cars, wearing expensive athletic gear, their confidence visible in every movement. Sarah pulled her old duffel bag from the trunk, the zipper held together with safety pins, and started walking toward the entrance. The guard at the gate looked her up and down with barely concealed surprise. "You sure you're in the right place, miss? This is a military training facility, not a community center." Sarah handed him her paperwork without a word. He scanned it, his eyebrows raising slightly, then waved her through with a shrug that said he'd seen stranger things, but not by much. The processing area was chaos, controlled by shouting sergeants and anxious recruits trying to follow rapid-fire instructions. Sarah found herself in a line behind a tall woman with perfect posture and designer luggage. The woman turned, looked Sarah over, and actually took a step away as if poverty might be contagious. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone used to being heard. "I think the civilian entrance is that way." She pointed toward a side building with a perfectly manicured finger. Sarah met her eyes calmly. "I'm a recruit, same as you." The woman's expression shifted from confusion to barely hidden amusement. "Really? Well, this should be interesting. I'm Victoria Lancaster. My family has been producing military officers for 6 generations. She extended her hand, but withdrew it before Sarah could respond. "Actually, maybe we should skip the handshake." "No offense." "None taken," Sarah replied, her voice flat and steady. The processing continued, with Sarah receiving her gear from a supply sergeant who seemed personally offended by her appearance. "This is premium military equipment," he said, practically throwing a uniform at her. "Try not to ruin it before you even start training." Around her, other recruits were forming groups, already establishing the social hierarchies that would define their experience. Sarah noticed several people whispering and glancing in her direction. One guy, muscular with an aggressive swagger, made no attempt to hide his laughter. "Check it out," he said loudly to his friends. "They're letting anyone in these days. What's next? Recruiting from homeless shelters." His name tag read Morrison, and his friends laughed on cue like a well-trained audience. Sarah pulled her uniform close and headed toward the changing area without responding. The barracks were standard military issue, rows of beds with thin mattresses and metal lockers that had seen decades of use. Sarah found her assigned bunk in the corner, as far from the entrance as possible. She was unpacking her few belongings when Victoria walked by with her new social circle. "That's where they put the charity case," Victoria announced. "Makes sense. Keep her away from the rest of us." A shorter woman with sharp features and expensive jewelry added, "I heard she doesn't even have a smartphone." "Can you imagine? What is she, living in the Stone Age?" Sarah continued unpacking, her movements slow and deliberate. She pulled out a worn photograph and looked at it for just a moment before tucking it into the bottom of her locker. In the photo, a younger version of herself stood next to a man in black tactical gear, his face turned away from the camera. The first night was brutal in ways that had nothing to do with physical training. The mess hall served basic food, but even that became an opportunity for humiliation. Sarah sat at a corner table with her tray, eating methodically while around her the social dynamics played out with cruel efficiency. Morrison walked by with his group and deliberately bumped her table, sending her water glass tipping. It splashed across her tray, soaking her food. The table erupted in laughter. "Whoops," Morrison said with theatrical innocence. "Guess you better get used to eating wet food. Or maybe you already are, living in whatever dumpster you came from." Sarah looked at the ruined meal, then at him, her expression completely neutral. She stood, picked up her tray, dumped it in the trash, and walked out of the mess hall without a word. Behind her, the laughter continued, but something about her complete lack of reaction seemed to make them laugh harder, as if her silence confirmed their superiority. The first real training day began before dawn, with a sergeant who had a voice like gravel and patience measured in microseconds. He lined them up in the yard, his eyes scanning the group with the intensity of someone searching for weakness. "Listen up," he barked. "I'm Sergeant Krakowski, and for the next 12 weeks, I own you. Your job is simple. Do what I say, when I say it, without question. Anyone have a problem with that?" Silence answered him. "Good. Now we're going to start with a basic fitness assessment. This will tell me who belongs here and who's wasting my time." The assessment was designed to break people. Push-ups until arms trembled, sit-ups until cores burned, sprints that left lungs gasping for air. Sarah kept pace with the middle of the group, not standing out, not falling behind. Her form was correct but not exceptional. She finished each exercise looking tired but not defeated. Morrison finished the push-ups first and made sure everyone knew it. 50 perfect form, he announced. Who wants to try and beat that? Victoria completed hers with elegant efficiency, barely breaking a sweat in her expensive, athletic wear. Sarah finished her set in the middle of the pack, her old sneakers leaving scuff marks on the asphalt. During a water break, a group formed around Morrison and Victoria, the natural leaders emerging through confidence and charisma. Sarah sat alone, retying her worn shoelaces for the third time that morning. "Hey, Sarah," Morrison called out. "You sure you can handle this? I mean, if you need to tap out, no one would blame you. This isn't for everyone." Before Sarah could respond, or choose not to, Victoria added, "Honestly, I'm worried about her dragging down our whole squad's performance. Maybe there's some kind of support role she could do instead, like laundry or something." The group laughed, and Sarah went back to tying her shoes, her fingers working the frayed laces with careful precision. The obstacle course came that afternoon, and it was a monster of rope climbs, wall scaling, mud pits, and balance beams. The group lined up, nervous energy crackling through them as they watched the first recruits tackle it. Morrison went early, attacking the course with aggressive confidence. He made it through in a respectable time, though he slipped twice in the mud pit and barely caught himself. Victoria followed with careful precision, her time slower, but her form nearly perfect. When Sarah's turn came, Morrison called out, "Try not to break anything. The equipment's expensive." Sarah stepped up to the starting line, her cheap sneakers sinking slightly into the mud. The whistle blew. She moved through the course with steady determination, not fast but not slow. Her technique was solid, her breathing controlled. She made it through without any spectacular success or failure, finishing in the middle of the rankings. As she walked back to the group, Morrison was waiting. Pretty average performance for someone taking up a valuable training slot. "You know there's people who actually belong here waiting for spots, right?" Sarah looked at him with those steady brown eyes. "I'm here to train, not to entertain you." Something about her quiet response made Morrison's smirk falter for just a moment. But he recovered quickly. "Whatever, just stay out of my way." That evening in the barracks, Sarah sat on her bunk cleaning mud from her old sneakers with a rag she'd found. The other recruits were scattered around, some writing letters home, others on their phones sharing photos and stories from the day. Victoria's voice carried across the room. "I'm telling you, Mom, there's this girl here who is completely out of place. She looks like she wandered in from the street. I don't know what the recruitment standards are anymore, but clearly they've dropped significantly." A few bunks away, Morrison was doing push-ups and making sure everyone noticed. When he finished, he looked directly at Sarah. "Tomorrow's hand-to-hand combat training. That's where we separate the real soldiers from the pretenders." Sarah didn't respond. She finished cleaning her shoes, set them beside her bunk, and lay back with her hands behind her head. Staring at the ceiling until lights out, the combat training facility was impressive. A large padded room, with equipment lining the walls, and practice mats covering the floor. Sergeant Krakowski stood in the center, flanked by 2 assistant instructors who looked like they could break concrete blocks with their foreheads. "Combat training is about discipline and technique," Krakowski announced. "Raw aggression gets you killed. Controlled precision keeps you alive. Today, we learn basic defensive maneuvers. He demonstrated a series of moves, his body flowing through positions with the ease of decades of practice. The recruits paired up, attempting to replicate what they'd seen. Sarah was paired with a quiet guy named Jackson, who seemed as eager to avoid attention as she was. They worked through the exercises in silence, both competent but unremarkable. Across the room, Morrison was paired with a smaller recruit and using the opportunity to show off, moving faster than necessary, adding flourishes that weren't part of the instruction. Krakowski walked the room, correcting form and offering harsh critiques. When he reached Sarah and Jackson, he watched them work through a sequence twice before speaking. "Chen," he said, using her last name. "Your stance is too narrow. Widen it or you'll get knocked over." Sarah adjusted immediately, her feet spreading to shoulder width. Krakowski watched her complete the move again and nodded once before moving on. It was the closest thing to approval anyone had received all day. During a water break, Victoria approached with her usual entourage. "So, Sarah," she said with false sweetness, "where exactly did you train before coming here?" "I'm just curious about your background." Sarah took a drink before responding. "I didn't train anywhere specific." Victoria's smile widened. "That explains so much. You know, most of us here have been preparing for this our whole lives. Private coaches, elite sports programs, military families." She gestured at the group around her. "We're here because we belong here, and you think I don't belong," Sarah said. "It wasn't a question. I think you're going to struggle," Victoria replied, dropping the pretense of friendliness. "And when you do, it's going to bring down everyone around you. That's not fair to those of us who actually deserve to be here." Sarah set down her water bottle and stood. "I'll try not to get in your way." "See that you don't," Victoria said, turning back to her group with a satisfied expression. The afternoon brought weapons training, specifically the M4 rifle. The recruits gathered around a table where the instructor, a lean man with sergeant stripes, demonstrated the proper handling and basic disassembly. "This weapon is your life in combat," he said. "You will treat it with respect. You will know every part, every function, every sound it makes. By the time you leave here, this rifle will be an extension of your body." He walked them through disassembly, each step explained in detail. Then came the test. Each recruit had to disassemble and reassemble the weapon while being timed. Mistakes meant starting over. Morrison went first, his confidence evident. He completed it in 2 minutes and 8 seconds, fumbling once with a pin, but recovering quickly. The group applauded. Victoria followed with elegant precision, finishing in 2 minutes and 34 seconds. Her technique was textbook perfect, every movement deliberate and controlled. Other recruits cycled through with varying degrees of success. Some finished, some had to restart. One person gave up entirely after 4 attempts. Then it was Sarah's turn. She stepped up to the table, her worn clothes somehow looking even more out of place next to the pristine military weapon. Morrison whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "This should be good. Wonder if she's even held a gun before." The instructor started the timer. Sarah's hands moved to the weapon and something shifted. Her movements became fluid and precise, not rushed but impossibly efficient. Pin released, bolt carrier group removed, parts arranged in perfect order. Then reassembly, each piece sliding into place with mechanical certainty. The timer stopped. 1 minute and 42 seconds. The room went quiet. The instructor checked the weapon, his eyebrows raising slightly. He looked at Sarah, then at the timer, then back at the weapon. "Where did you learn to do that, Chen?" Sarah's face was carefully blank. "Practice, sir." The instructor held her gaze for a moment, clearly wanting more information, but Sarah offered nothing else. He nodded slowly. "Good work." Next, as Sarah stepped back from the table, the whispers started immediately. Morrison's confident smirk had faded slightly. Victoria looked confused, her perfect worldview showing its first cracks. During the evening meal, Sarah sat at her usual corner table, but this time several people were watching her with new expressions. Not respect exactly, but uncertainty. The girl they'd dismissed as incompetent had just outperformed everyone in the group at a critical skill. Jackson, The quiet recruit who'd been her training partner approached hesitantly. "Hey, that was really impressive today. With the rifle." Sarah looked up at him. "Thanks. Where did you actually learn that?" Jackson pressed. "That wasn't beginner level." Sarah took a bite of her food, chewed slowly and said, "I've practiced before." Jackson seemed to understand she wasn't going to elaborate. He nodded and walked back to his table, but Sarah could feel eyes on her throughout the meal. The dynamics were shifting, just slightly but noticeably. That night in the barracks, the conversations were different. Victoria was on her phone, her usual confident tone replaced with something more thoughtful. Morrison was uncharacteristically quiet, doing maintenance on his gear with unnecessary focus. Sarah sat on her bunk, writing in a small, worn notebook. Her handwriting was neat and precise, filling page after page with observations and thoughts she shared with no one. When she finally closed the notebook and tucked it under her pillow, she caught Morrison watching her. "Something you need?" she asked. Morrison looked away quickly. "No, just wondering how someone like you knows how to handle weapons like that." Sarah lay back on her bunk. "Training," she said simply. "Just like everyone else here." But Morrison knew that wasn't quite true. And so did several other people in that room. The girl they'd dismissed was becoming harder to categorize, and in a place where everyone needed to understand the hierarchy that made her dangerous in ways they didn't yet understand. The next morning brought repelling training at a 40-foot tower. The structure loomed over the training ground, and nervous energy filled the assembled recruits as they received instruction on proper harness use and rope handling. "The key is controlled descent," the instructor explained. "You're fighting gravity and managing fear simultaneously. Both will try to kill you if you let them." Morrison volunteered to go first, attacking the tower with his usual aggressive confidence. His descent was fast but sloppy, and he hit the ground harder than intended, stumbling slightly before recovering his balance. The group applauded anyway. Victoria followed with textbook form, her descent controlled and elegant. She touched down gently and stepped away from the rope with a satisfied smile. Other recruits went in turn, some freezing at the top, some descending too fast. One person refusing to go at all, despite the instructor's increasingly harsh encouragement. Sarah stepped up in the middle of the pack. She checked her harness with careful fingers, tested the rope and looked down at the ground 40 feet below. For a moment something flickered in her expression, too quick to identify. Then she stepped backward off the platform. Her descent was neither fast nor slow. It was controlled, each movement precise, her body positioning perfect. She touched down with barely a sound and efficiently unclipped from the rope. The instructor watching nodded approvingly. "Good form, Chen. You've done this before, a little," Sarah admitted, which was becoming her standard non-answer to questions about her background. During the lunch break, a small group had formed to discuss the growing mystery of Sarah Chen. Jackson was there, along with 2 other recruits who'd been watching her performance closely. "She's not what she seems," Jackson said quietly. "The rifle, the rappelling, even the way she moves. It's too practiced. Maybe she just trained hard before coming here," one of the others suggested. Jackson shook his head. "It's more than that. You see how she doesn't react when they mock her? That's not someone who's scared or intimidated. That's someone who's choosing not to respond." Across the mess hall, Victoria and Morrison were having a similar conversation with very different conclusions. "She's probably just lucky," Morrison insisted. "A few good performances don't mean anything. When it comes to real combat situations, she'll crack." Victoria wasn't so sure. "I had my father make some calls. Her recruitment file is surprisingly thin. Almost no background information beyond basic identification. What does that mean?" Morrison asked. "It means either she's nobody important, or somebody made sure she looks like nobody important," Victoria replied. Her perfectly shaped eyebrows furrowed in thought. The afternoon brought land navigation training, a critical skill where recruits had to use map and compass to find checkpoints scattered across several miles of rough terrain. They would work in pairs, and the instructors deliberately paired people who hadn't worked together before. Sarah was paired with a recruit named Williams, a stocky guy who'd kept to himself mostly but had performed competently in every exercise. They received their map, compass, and instructions, then headed into the wooded training area. For the first 10 minutes, they walked in silence. Williams studying the map while Sarah checked their compass heading. Then Williams spoke. "You know they're all talking about you, right?" Sarah adjusted their heading slightly. "I know. Doesn't it bother you? The way they treat you?" Sarah stopped, taking a moment to check their position against the map. "What would bothering me accomplish? Would it make them stop? Would it change anything?" Williams considered this. "I guess not. But most people would at least defend themselves. Most people aren't here to make friends," Sarah replied. "They're here to prove something. To themselves, to their families, to whoever's watching." She started walking again. "I'm just here to complete the training." They found their first checkpoint easily, then the second. The third was harder, requiring them to cross a steep ravine and navigate through dense underbrush. Sarah moved through the terrain with surprising confidence, her worn sneakers somehow finding purchase where others would have slipped. "You've done this before too," William said. It wasn't a question. Sarah marked their map without responding. They continued to the fourth checkpoint, finishing their route with time to spare. As they headed back to the rally point, they passed Morrison and his partner, who were arguing loudly about which direction to go. "Need help?" Williams called out, Morrison's face flushed with anger. "We don't need help from you two, especially not from her." He pointed at Sarah dismissively. Sarah and Williams kept walking. Behind them, Morrison's voice echoed through the trees, still arguing with his partner about the map. Back at the rally point, Sergeant Krakowski was marking completion times. Sarah and Williams checked in fourth out of 20 pairs, a solid performance. Morrison and his partner arrived much later, muddy and frustrated, having gotten turned around twice. That evening, the barracks had a different energy. The constant mockery had quieted somewhat, replaced by a watchful uncertainty. Sarah sat on her bunk, as usual, but now people were observing her differently. Victoria approached, her expression carefully neutral. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" Sarah looked up from the book she was reading, waiting. "Your recruitment file doesn't have much information. No listed previous training, no military family background, nothing about your education. It's almost blank." "Okay," Sarah said, offering nothing more. "That's unusual," Victoria pressed. "Most people here have files full of accomplishments, recommendations, background details. Yours is practically empty. Maybe I don't have many accomplishments to list." Victoria studied her carefully. Or maybe someone didn't want certain information included. She let that hang in the air between them before walking away, leaving Sarah with her book and her secrets. The week continued with increasingly difficult training. Each day brought new challenges, new opportunities for failure, and new chances for the group dynamics to shift. Sarah continued her pattern of solid but unremarkable performance, never standing out except in those specific moments where her skills mysteriously exceeded her apparent background. On Friday evening, Sergeant Krakowski announced the next week's main event. "Next Monday we begin full-contact combat training. You'll be paired randomly and you'll fight. Real hits, real defense, real consequences. This is where we find out who has what it takes." The barracks buzzed with nervous energy that night. Some people talked strategy, others bragged about their martial arts backgrounds. Morrison was particularly vocal about his plans to dominate. Sarah said nothing. She lay on her bunk, hands behind her head, that worn photograph tucked in her locker alongside secrets that nobody had yet uncovered. The mockery had quieted, but Monday would bring something worse. It would bring a real test, and when that happened, the carefully constructed walls around her identity might finally crack. She closed her eyes, remembering training sessions from years ago, a voice saying, "The most dangerous fighter is the one nobody sees coming. Let them underestimate you. Let them think they know what you are. Then show them they were wrong." Monday was coming, and with it, everything would change. Monday arrived with tension thick enough to cut. The combat training facility filled with recruits, their nervous energy crackling through the air. Sergeant Krakowski stood in the center, his expression harder than usual. Full contact means exactly that. he announced. You will hit, you will be hit. You will learn what real combat feels like. Medical staff are standing by. Any questions? Silence answered him. First match. Morrison and Sarah's stomach tightened, but her face remained calm. Morrison grinned widely, cracking his knuckles with theatrical flair. The other recruits formed a circle around the mat, phones already out to record what they expected would be Sarah's humiliation. Morrison stepped onto the mat, bouncing on his toes like a professional fighter. Sarah walked forward slowly, her worn sneakers quiet against the padding. They faced each other, and Morrison leaned close enough that only she could hear. I'm going to enjoy this, he whispered. Time to send you back where you belong. The whistle blew. Morrison charged immediately, throwing a heavy right hook aimed at Sarah's face. She moved just enough to let it pass her cheek. He followed with a left, then a combination of punches designed to overwhelm with pure aggression. But Sarah wasn't there when his fists arrived. She flowed around his attacks like water, her movements minimal but perfectly timed. Morrison grew frustrated, swinging harder, moving faster, exhausting himself against an opponent who seemed to disappear whenever he got close. Stand still and fight, Morrison roared, his face red with exertion and anger. Sarah said nothing. She waited, watching, calculating. When Morrison threw another wild haymaker, overextending himself with desperation, she finally moved, with intent. She stepped inside his guard, her hand finding his wrist, her body rotating with precision that came from years of training that nobody knew about. Morrison flew through the air and crashed onto the mat hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. The circle of recruits went completely silent. He struggled to his feet, rage replacing confidence. He charged again, this time trying to tackle her to the ground with pure size and strength. Sarah sidestepped, her foot hooking behind his ankle. Morrison went down face first, and before he could recover, Sarah had him in a control hold that made any movement painful. Tap out, Morrison, Sergeant Krakowski commanded. Morrison's hand slapped the mat 3 times. Sarah released him immediately and stood, breathing steady, not even sweating. The sergeant looked at Sarah with new intensity. Where did you learn to do that, Chen? Before Sarah could answer with her usual non-response, Morrison exploded with humiliated fury. He lunged at her from behind, grabbing her training shirt and yanking hard. The fabric tore from collar to hem, ripping completely away, and there, across Sarah's back, stretched a tattoo that made everyone freeze. A black phoenix rising from flames, its wings spread wide across her shoulder blades. But it wasn't the artistry that stopped them cold. It was the military insignia woven into the design, a symbol that every soldier knew but few had ever seen in person. The mark of the Shadow Phoenix Unit, an elite special operations group so classified that most people thought it was a myth. The room went deathly silent. Sergeant Krakowski's face drained of color. He straightened immediately to attention, his hand snapping to his forehead in a crisp salute. Morrison stumbled backward, his anger replaced by shock and growing horror. The door to the training facility burst open. A man in an officer's uniform strode in, his chest covered with medals and ribbons. Commander Hayes, the base's highest-ranking officer. He'd been watching from the observation room. He walked directly to Sarah, his expression unreadable. Everyone else remained frozen. Agent Chen, he said formally, your cover is compromised. Sarah stood there, her torn shirt revealing the tattoo that changed everything. She looked at Morrison, then at Victoria, then at the assembled recruits who had spent weeks mocking her. My real name is Sarah Chen, she said quietly. I'm a field operative with Defense Intelligence. I was sent here undercover to evaluate training protocols and identify security vulnerabilities in the recruitment process. She paused, letting that sink in. You all failed the real test. Victoria's phone slipped from her hand, clattering on the floor. Jackson's mouth hung open. Morrison looked like he might be sick. Commander Hayes addressed the group. Everything you've done and said for the past 3 weeks has been recorded and evaluated. Your treatment of someone you perceived as inferior has been noted in your permanent files. He turned to Morrison specifically. Your assault on a federal agent will result in immediate dismissal from this program and possible criminal charges. Morrison's face went from red to white. But I didn't know, he stammered. Exactly, Commander Hayes said coldly. You didn't know and you didn't care. That's the problem. Sarah pulled on a jacket someone handed her, covering the tattoo. She looked around at the faces that had tormented her, seeing fear and shame, replacing cruelty. The real enemy doesn't announce itself, she said. It hides in plain sight, waiting for you to underestimate it. Every one of you did exactly that. She picked up her old duffel bag. You saw someone who looked different and decided they didn't belong. That kind of thinking gets people killed in the field. Commander Hayes nodded to her. The car is waiting, Agent Chen. As Sarah walked toward the exit, Victoria found her voice. Wait, was any of it real? Were you really just evaluating us? Sarah stopped at the door, looking back. The training was real. The skills I showed you were real. Everything else, you chose to see what you wanted to see. She walked out, leaving behind a training facility that would never forget the lesson she taught. Morrison was escorted off base within the hour. Victoria and several others received formal reprimands. The entire program underwent massive reforms. But Sarah Chen was already gone, driving away in that old sedan toward her next assignment. In her rearview mirror, Fort Sterling grew smaller until it disappeared completely. The worn clothes, the humble appearance, the careful silence, all of it had been a test that an entire facility had failed. Sometimes the most important battles are fought by the people nobody expects to fight them. And sometimes the person everyone underestimates turns out to be exactly who they needed to respect all along. The real lesson wasn't about combat skills or physical strength. It was about recognizing that true capability doesn't always announce itself with expensive gear and confident swagger. Sometimes it arrives in torn sneakers and a quiet voice, waiting patiently for the moment when silence becomes the loudest statement of all. Sarah Chen had given them that moment. What they chose to do with the lesson was up to them.